Welcome to Inside Luxembourg Sport, the podcast where we talk about everything to do with high-performance sport in Luxembourg. Today, I am delighted to have with me the head coach of Luxembourg's national rugby team, amongst other hats he wears, a good friend of mine, James Kent. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
James, I want to start. I'm going to dive straight in. What is a day in the life like of a head coach of a national team at this moment in time?
At this particular moment in time, it's a bit frantic from a mix of, I suppose, the sporting point of view, because you're not dealing with professional players in the sense that you're seeing them every day like you would be in a professional club. So the preparation time is somewhat limited. So by looking at the time that you do have together, so planning that, making sure that you're trying to get the right messages across, that you're trying to be simple in those messages and not trying to do too much with the time frame that you have. All that balanced with a busy family life, and then making sure that I don't overlook any other responsibilities that I've got outside of that national team cap, no pun intended, that I wear as a national team coach.
I'm always interested in this bit about national teams and kind of jumping straight in. How does it differ from your day-to-day kind of coaching role that people might see in a club setting?
I think, as I mentioned, you've got to be clear in what you want to achieve. So you need to have clarity on you as a coach, what you think you can do with this team and what you think this team would benefit from. And then from there, you start looking at the little boxes and trying to tick the little boxes on what you need to do from whether it be a technical, tactical, physical, mental, whatever kind of preparation that needs to be done. You almost need to break it down and go, okay, in terms of priority, what's more important? What's going to put us in the best position possible to try and compete when it comes to game time? And national team, regardless of if it's a professional setup or an amateur setup, your biggest constraint is time. And every coach's problem is that there's never enough of it.
So how much time would you get with the players?
Obviously, I've only, under my belt, I suppose, I've got the Czech Republic game, and that was a bit different in terms of context because my appointment in 10 days before, it doesn't need a lot of time for preparation. And personally, I'm one that likes to prepare, in depth, even though we may not execute what's been planned. At least I've got a plan B. I like to know what's happening. I like to have clarity in my thinking and able to then pass that on to the team, because I believe if they know what's happening, then there's a lot of things they don't need to worry about and they can just focus on the footy. So for the game next week against Sweden, for example, at the time of recording, last night we had a session in the dojo in the gym at the Cock, which was good. Again, you're working with reduced numbers because there's a lot of offshore players that, again, not being professional, can't take the time off work or studies to come this early. Thursday we'll have another session again, reduced numbers, but at Wolfenage Rugby Club. So that's something that I was looking at because, generally speaking, it's been done at Cessange with RCL. I think it's important to recognise the fact that there are 3 senior rugby clubs, with Esch as well being the 3rd. And I think it's important to be able to have a presence in all 3 clubs, because you're talking about the national team, and those 3 clubs are very much invested in Luxembourgish rugby. So in that week, this week, it would just be the 2 sessions with a 3rd one on the Friday, which is potentially a conditioning/video session via Zoom for those who are offshore. Yeah. And then the following week, where hopefully we'll have a few more guys fly in, will be a Tuesday night dojo gym, a Wednesday collective session with RCL. Thursday is where we will have an NS mini camp, so we'll spend the day together, a couple of training sessions. Friday, captain's run, and Saturday game.
Still full on as a recreational, it's like non-professional kind of setup. How does it differ then, I suppose, as well, when you've been in many setups with kind of French teams, Stade France, Canada, all over the world? How does this in Luxembourg then differ from some of those kind of things?
I think the biggest challenge is having the players offside, because although Canada, for example, was a big country, we'd be able to bring them in. And there was also, I suppose, this, I don't want to say agreement, but they'd be able to, because Canada, having worked with the men's and the women's, when I first worked with them going to the World Cup in 2014, so I'd say 95% of those of those girls, those women were working or studying and had to take time off from work, from studying, from their families, from being mothers, and actually pay as well to go to the World Cup.
Yeah.
And so that in itself has allowed me, I suppose, to see what's possible despite resources, lack of finances, if there's a willingness to be there and to represent your country. And so that's almost allowed me to set the bar and go, okay, well, this is possible. You don't have the same resources as a French team would do, or same finances and the same country. But I think the fact that the guys are playing in France, in the UK, in Holland, in Spain, can be hard to bring everyone together and get everybody on the same page in a short amount of time. And the challenge would be when you're trying to create a culture when you're not together too often, because we don't have the luxury of coming together for 2 weeks or even a week together for that entire.
How do you cope with some of that? So you have online meetings, or you have different sessions for individuals, or?
Online meetings since the pandemic has been more commonly accepted. And
probably the thing from coaching that we've got really good at, actually using COVID as a way to do that,
And a lot of the one-on-ones I did and the reviews that I did with after the Czech game, those that were offshore, I did via Zoom because I was able to share my screen, show them clips, and we're still able to have conversations that way, because I think the fact that you are still seeing each other, that's a big help, and it's the next best thing to sitting down face-to-face.
Yeah.
So I think using the technology that we have to our advantage is a big one. And Friday, I suppose, will be a good test in that, and seeing how we can try and connect as many places as we can, be it in person and online.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a combination of both. There's going to be a theme. There's always a theme. Can you talk about your themes? Those of you who don't know, James is a big fan of theming things. Different ideas. There's been race cars. There's been all sorts of things.
Can't reveal the one for Sweden just yet because it's still finalising it. But examples would have been from Monaco, for example. I had the Formula One theme, the link with Monaco and the Grand Prix there. And then within that, we had sub-themes around a storm when we played in La Rochelle because of the proximity of being a coastal town. We had the Money Heist TV series theme when we played in Po because of the proximity to the Spanish border. When we played in the Czech Republic with Luxembourg, we played on an old Speedway track. Well, let's say the Speedway track was around the pitch. So the theme was Speedway. I don't know too much about Speedway, but I went down this rabbit hole of looking at Speedway bikes and videos. And the impressive thing about it, they go 110 to 130 kilometers an hour around the track. No brakes.
No brakes. They're crazy.
No
they stop with a metal extra bit on the sole of the shoe or something like that.
It's impressive. Captain's Run, I was able to see the track, and I couldn't get over how narrow it was for some of the speeds they hit. So our theme for that was around the Speedway bike and just going with a philosophy of all gas, no brakes kind of approach. And that was a theme and the tagline for that particular game. I like to go into depth on themes, and again, time is the biggest issue. So, when we do have time, and with Monaco, I was able to do it in terms of the language that we use from a tactical point of view is I like to link it through to the theme, although obviously in this case, slightly different context. So for these 3 games, it's going to be a different theme for all through.
What's the theory behind the themes itself?
It's something that I find players will hopefully resonate with, and it allows you to drop some anchors in terms of retention of the information that you're giving. Because at the end of the day, that's what's important, especially when you're limited on time. How are they going to remember what you tell them? You need to be clear in your messaging, but how can you find that hook? How can you find something to link it to that they're going to remember, but at the same time enjoy? And I think we've spoken about this a few times in terms of, being more relational in our rather than transactional with players. So we build that relationship, create this buy-in through, whether it be through theming or through others or through connections, human connections, and trying to create a sense of belonging to the group, rather than this is the X's and the O's that we're going to use, which is what every team, has to do anyway. But it's how do you dress it up? And it's something that I was always a fan of theming for a long time. It's something in Canada we didn't necessarily do a lot of. I started having a look probably about 6-7 years ago. A few teams started doing it, different sports. And whilst I was with Stade Francais in Paris, Paul Gustard, who I worked with there, the defence coach, he huge theming man. Every game, every week, there would be a different theme.
I was going to ask that. Do you change it regularly, or do you stick with the one if you're going through the season?
No, there's always an overriding theme, global theme. which perhaps your language is linked to, or what you want to try and, maybe your outcomes are linked to it, and you can try and dress it up that way. But then every week, and with Monaco, every tournament, I tried to change it up so that it didn't get too repetitive or too mundane.
Okay. But you keep the same kind of ideologies, as well, as you're kind of going through, so you make it simple.
It's fun because if you're playing different opposition every week, you can create a narrative around that every week. And hopefully you get to the point where you've got players coming in and saying, oh, I wonder what he's got for us. With Monaco for the final in February, players had already come into camp, apparently between themselves, discussing what's the theme going to be. I'm trying to guess what the theme would be. So I suppose that meant that they'd bought into it, and it was something that they enjoyed.
Yeah. So what's been the craziest? What's the craziest theme that's been one of the ones that you remember?
Not my theme, but when we were in Paris, Paul Gusta's theme. I remember we were playing UBB Bordeaux, and Monday morning, 9 a.m, he'd set up the meeting room, and all the players came in, and then from beneath the desk he pulled out a bottle of wine, a Bordeaux, which he'd drained. It was an empty bottle, but he'd filled it up with some grape juice, poured himself a glass of wine. So all the players were looking at each other going, what is he doing? It's 10 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, and he's pouring himself a glass of wine. He drank it, and for dramatic effect, spat it back out into the glass. And then just started the narrative about there's good Bordeaux wines and there's not so good Bordeaux wines. And so that sort of went into the team, and because obviously we were traveling there into the region, into the wine region. So I thought that was quite a good one, because it required a certain amount of showmanship and acting and performance as well as a company. And I think if you can merge the two, then you really bring it to life.
Yeah. So you've got to commit wholeheartedly to it.
You have to bring it to life, and you start by bringing it to life, and then the players ultimately will bring it to life, because if they buy into it, then they'll live that theme.
Is it something then that you would teaching younger people, or want to be coaches? I know you've done some stuff here at Lunex when you're talking to coaches. Do you talk to them about this kind of theming ideas? And
I think it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
I think some coaches will probably be more on the tactical, some will be more on the man management, some will be more creative, and I don't think it's necessarily the approach for all coaches, because ultimately if you try to do it and you try to copy what someone else is doing and it's not really you get found out and you're not authentic about it. And for my themes, I put a lot of work into them and a lot of thought into it. But then because I want to believe it myself, I need to believe it myself before I then, share the theme. And if I don't believe it's a good theme or it's not going to work, then I'll try and find something else. But I feel really passionate about it. So when I'm talking about it, I say with conviction because I believe it, and that allows the players to as well, hopefully buy into it.
Yeah. No, so we've been talking obviously about helping the players understand. You're also kind of thinking you're developing these players as well. So you're developing them as individuals, but as athletes. But you're as a national team setup, you're doing it in a much smaller time frame. So how do you go about balancing out some of that kind of development with skills, with tactics, strategies, understanding for young players?
For example, when I did the reviews, the one-on-one reviews after the Czech game, I told the players, some of them who I had the reviews with, that the skillful hunter who tries to catch 4 rabbits catches none. And for me, that's just, focusing on one aspect. Focus on that one rabbit that you've got to try and catch, because you're going to get you'll be more focused and a clearer idea of what you need to work on, as opposed to thinking I need to get better at this, and that. So then yesterday's session, we did a bit of tackle tech, and I asked each of them, what they would take away from that. Take me one thing that you're going to take away and work on. And some were the same, some were different things. And if you can focus on that aspect in terms of your skill development or skill acquisition, then you will probably see better gains in a shorter amount of time. Same thing with working on your strengths. Ultimately, you're selected on what you can do, not what you can't do. So if you're exceptionally good over the ball, then keep working at that. Rather than going, well, I'm not too good on my catch pass, I'll spend some more time on the catch pass and get over the ball because I think I'm already good over the ball. No, for me, you have to be, elite or world class at one thing, because that's the reason you'll be picked. And then after that, you can start building, because you're going to enjoy the process and enjoy the journey more when you're trying to work on your strengths, because you know you're good at it, and you see improvement faster. Whereas you might get frustrated, and it's going to take longer to get better at maybe what your weakness is.
Yeah, I think it's something important that we don't do a lot in coaching, is actually support people about what are you good at? How do you go from good to great? How do you get those extra kind of 10%? Yeah. There's always kind of this kind of feel or need that we have to tell people what they're doing wrong, and we have to work on our weaknesses. So I much prefer, and I even say it here with the students, Linux students, just saying, right, how things you're good at, how do you make them great at those? And then how do you go from great to elite at those kind of things?
Because it's your strength. That's why you're there. So you always need to, sharpen that up and be the best at it. And then gradually, then you go, okay, then I can start adding the strings to the bow. But I think you're familiar with having been a skills coach as well, I think it's important that it'd be easy to say, well, he's not very good at that. He needs to get better at that. Okay. You take that into consideration. But within, I suppose, your periodization, when you're looking at, individual skill plans or individual development plans for players, this is your super strength. And this is what I want you to get really good at.
Do you find the Luxembourgish players are getting into that here?
I think, for me personally, I think it's too early to tell. I've not been in the seat long enough to be able to comment. Time will tell, and even time in terms of the next couple of weeks from that Czech game. It'll have been 3 weeks until after the Poland game. So 3 weeks, you can still work on your craft. And I think if you're dedicated to it, then you can still see improvement, especially from a skills point of view rather than, I suppose, a physical.
Yeah. How do you see the long-term progression of particularly rugby in this country, high-performance sport in this country? Do you have a vision about where you could see the rugby team getting to?
I think the potential is huge because of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
The resources available. The challenges would be the depth of players. But again, that starts with doing the work from a development point of view, getting more kids interested in rugby, I suppose promoting rugby, the opportunity to play in Stade du Luxembourg, which is unbelievable ground. That should be really inspiring for young kids to be thinking, okay, I want to go play there. I have aspirations to play not only for Luxembourg, but play international rugby against some good teams. And at the moment, Luxembourg are playing in the third tier. So you've got Six Nations B, and a trophy. And in this competition, you're 4 wins away or 5 wins away from playing teams that go to World Cups.
It's pretty close.
So it's pretty close. I think you're not far off the mark, and there's a lot of potential, but it needs to be a collaborative sort of working approach. Because it's easy to get caught up in not looking at the bigger picture for the benefit of Luxembourgish rugby. And there's some great players that have come out in recent years as well who have gone on to play, who are playing in Nat 1 in the UK, who are playing Division d'Honneur in Spain. I think that's only going to help broaden their horizons, but they're going to come back, be able to bring their skill sets and what they've learned and their experience back to Luxembourg. And that's probably, although the population size is very small compared to the likes of a Poland, for example, I think that's one of the advantages, is that it is very international. So there'll be students that go over to anywhere across Europe and they'll hopefully pick up a rugby ball and join a club and try to play at the highest level.
So how do we go about encouraging more people to get involved?
The big question, isn't it? It's do you allocate time, resources, money into the grassroots and development side of it? Or do you try and push that high performance side of it, whereby you actually get a player making it to the elite, playing in the top 14, playing Super Rugby? There's a German kid now who's playing for the Blues in Super Rugby. Yeah. He went over from Frankfurt when he was 16, 17, and arguably you look at him and you go, well, he hasn't been capped by Germany because he wants to play for the All Blacks.
Right.
I think there's examples of that where even in other sports, in basketball, when there'll be a Luxembourg player that cracks the NBA, that's going to create a lot of traction. And I think a lot of young Luxembourgish basketballers will go, actually, there's a shot, there's a pathway there.
That's probably what, I know we've talked about this before, that pathway. It's not obviously obvious for Luxembourgish sport because there's no real professional teams kind of going around here. You're not making a full-time professional career staying here. So the kind of philosophy, I guess, is you get good and then you move away. How do you think that affects kind of sports like rugby or basketball?
Yeah, it's tricky because the competition is always going to be better elsewhere in terms of club. Whether it's basketball, you're always going to have the NBA. the EuroLeague, or you always have the top 14 in rugby or Premiership or what have you. So I think you need to almost encourage players to go out and play at the highest level that they possibly can. We're not in the same position like in England where they're worried about domestic players going to play overseas, because it's going to weaken their product in terms of a domestic league, because there is no domestic league in terms of rugby in Luxembourg. Play in the Bundesliga and Bundesliga 2. So it's an opportunity for players though to try something different in terms of playing styles, testing themselves against professional, semi-professional players as well. I think that you'd be surprised by some of the players that could make it there if they really wanted it.
Okay. So we could see a few Luxembourgish rugby players coming out?
I would say so. I mean, a few years ago, Carol, Tony Drennan at the Stade Francais Academy, there's a few of them in France on a pro level. So I wouldn't say it's impossible, no.
Is there a different kind of mentality with some of those kind of players that you mentioned, that they have a push to obviously go away to be the best players they can be?
I think you need to have the right mindset, and you have to go with an open mind and realise that maybe there was a time when you were dominating in Luxembourg. As soon as you realise, okay, I'll go into a bigger league, and suddenly you see what the standard is like. But I think that's the only way that you improve as a player is by playing with those that are better than you and against guys that are better than you, and learning off teammates and more experienced players. So I think it'd be an eye-opener for a lot of them. It's something I think that most sports in Luxembourg would probably benefit from, because say you have a footballer who plays at, I don't know, Chelsea or Arsenal, the experience that he's going to come back with to the national team and be able to help. And obviously from a physical point of view, they're going to be in top physical condition, but also they're just going to be used to playing under greater stress. And so the pressure of the game, they'll probably alleviate some of the pressure from their teammates. And so I only see benefits from it, because essentially that's the difference between a national team being involved in a representative team or national team and a club team.
Yeah, I find it interesting now, but because I see a lot of people here in Luxembourg, they don't necessarily want to leave, but you're kind of suggesting to reach the highest levels of sport, you kind of have to at least go away for a short period of time.
It wouldn't just be, I would say that to anyone around the world really, to be able to experience something different. There's been quite a few Luxembourgish guys who have gone over to New Zealand to play a season there, or Wales to play a season, or Canada or the States. And that's been the strength of Luxembourgish rugby, has been this ability to bring their rugby IQ and knowledge of the game and experiences and share that. And I think that's one advantage that you can have over some of those other European teams, where actually you've got possibilities to go abroad and play either through the network or through just an opportunity that arises.
Are they kind of open to that in some of the other nations? Kind of, Luxembourg is small, it's kind of, are they probably not seen as a competitor to...
If you're a good rugby player, you're a good rugby player. Yeah. It's the same, I suppose, similar to the old adage, if you're good enough, you're old enough. So I think there'd be a great opportunity for a lot of the guys, because it'd put Luxembourg on the map in that sense as well, and show that Luxembourg, sport and Luxembourg in general is on the rise. And I think everything is in place to be able to get a good product, a good end product. It's just a process that we need to probably about.
So what is that process? Kind of constantly think, what's the best way to go? You talked about, let's get a few top-level athletes and kind of almost market them and show what they're doing. It's probably a bit more difficult in rugby, where you need 15 or 22 to get up there. But
I think that's the way of being able to, and I'm not just talking about rugby, but sports in general, being able to create more of a sporting culture, like, what we have in Australia, and being able to watch live sports and have kids go to Stade de Luxembourg and think, I wouldn't mind working here as a job when I'm older, whether it's, it could be a groundskeeper, it could be media, it could be physio, it could be SNC, it could be referee, it could be player, it could be coach, whatever. But is that clear pathway to work in sports? And I think once you've got that bite of working in sports and the adrenaline rush that you get of being at a live event, and especially in a stadium like that, if you fill that up, you get some noise from it. And I think everybody wants to be a part of something bigger, whether it's through the long term, whether it's where you work or where you study or family, or even if it's just a one-off event. If you go to a concert or you go to a sporting event, you want to feel a part of it because you feel the energy of everyone around you.
So we kind of need more live sports events.
Yeah.
Definitely.
For all sports.
All sports, and promote much more about what's going on.
Yeah.
Do you tend to see things happen, or they've happened before, and then they're we should have known about that to be able to go to it. But
so I think it's about how we promote it and how we communicate it, because there's a lot of people who would love to go watch love sports. So the interest is there and the market is there, and you just need to look at things that the NFL are doing. They're just being able to start playing in Europe and still pack out stadiums.
Yeah.
This is only with the exception of NFL Europe, which is slightly different, but you've only got the United States playing. Yet you're still able to pack out a stadium in Madrid and Berlin and London and Paris, and for NBA now as well coming over. So why wouldn't we be able to host a sevens leg on the HSBC or Olympic qualifier, just like Monaco do? So Monaco every 4 years they hold the Olympic qualifiers for the seven at their national stadium. I think there's a lot of scope for it in that sense.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of allowing people to see more of it. Think about that as well, kind of your background. Obviously, you spoke about Australia, but you played in Canada and the UK and stuff like that. There is a bit more of a culture about going to sport and doing sport and taking part in sport on a regular basis than there seems to be here. Do you notice any changes there?
I'd say so. I'd say since I arrived in 2017, and I think I have noticed a change. You've 24-hour gyms now, which you didn't before, and I can personally attest that even if I go at 4:30 in the morning, there's a few people there. I'm not the only one. So yeah, this sort of willingness to do sports and train, and in terms of healthy eating and the sports gyms, training centres, that's growing a lot. I think it's only a positive, and perhaps, we're a few years away from complete mind shift, but I don't think we're too far away. Again, it just needs to be accessible, which is another issue where sometimes in Australia we've got the luxury of being able to just go into any park and have an even playing surface where you won't find a molehill. You can still play. You can play a game of football. You can play frisbee. You can play rugby. You can do whatever you want, cricket, and you're just able to go out there. You don't need to reserve. It's just a public park, public space. And I think maybe it's a little bit difficult because the parks are not really, they don't have that kind of space. Yeah. And then the grounds that can be used for football or other, it's, making a reservation through a commune and then trying to book time, even if you just want to kick about with a couple of friends. And so again, accessibility is probably one of the main ones, because we want to try and encourage kids to go outside and develop their skills, and supposed to just being able to play sport. Yeah, it's given that opportunity to go and do some things. I'm going to change tact a little bit because we're obviously talking about high performance sport, and I know we have a lot of students wanting to work in high performance sport. I know your venture into it has been quite diverse. Can you just give us a little bit of background about how you've managed to work your way into high performance sport? So long story short, I didn't study anything that was really sports related. I found this out recently when I did a bit of research about you, and I saw that you studied something slightly different. Yeah, so because back then there were very few universities that offered anything to do in sports. I wanted to do something in sports, whether it be sports science, sports management, or exercise science. And, during my gap year, I went to Madrid. It was meant to be for 3 months, and I ended up staying close to 10 years because I got offered the opportunity to stay there, play rugby for one of the top teams there. And that was one of the appeals of staying. And then I decided I was going to try and go to university there. There wasn't really the opportunity to study sports there. And also my Spanish was fairly limited. So I also had that on my plate, that I had to pick up Spanish very quickly if I was going to be able to do an undergrad in Spanish in a completely different field. So yeah, my undergrad degree was in international tourism, and then I followed it up with one in business management, although that one was in English, so slightly easier. I'd been playing rugby, playing basketball, and originally I'd thought about playing basketball in Spain because I arrived in Spain not knowing anyone. I went by myself when I was 19, not speaking Spanish. I ended up going to a local Irish pub, as you do, where a social rugby team got together every Thursday. I thought it would be the best way to meet, people like myself. So I ended up playing social rugby there, and off the back of the social sevens tournament, that's where I got asked, scouted, I suppose you could say, to this team in the top division. But then it almost snowballed a little bit. I just forgot completely about basketball, ended up playing rugby, and then through injury, ACL, meniscus, I wanted to stay involved and coach, and so I sort of started wearing a coach's hat as a very young coach, but then got back into playing. And by the time I'd finished my studies, it was the financial crisis. And so there was 40% unemployment in Spain between 18 and 35-year-olds. So not much of a job market. So I ended up going to the States. I went to New York for 6 months to work there in a startup company in marketing. Again, nothing to do with sports. And the opportunity came to take part in inaugural women's sevens from the HSBC circuit. which is happening in Houston. I applied to be a liaison officer. It was a voluntary role, all expenses paid. So I took 2 weeks off work. I flew down to Houston and I was assigned the Canadian team because of the fact that I speak French as well. So at least that's what I believe. I don't know if I was never confirmed. But that 2 weeks, I basically realised that I wanted to get into elite sport and I didn't want to go back to my cubicle in Rugby. And so I ended up staying in contact with a high performance manager who was a Kiwi who I got on well with over the last 2 weeks. And I said to him, look, if anything ever comes up, I'll be willing to relocate and move to Canada tomorrow. 6 months went by and I got an email from him telling me there might be an opportunity. 3 months to begin with, but it was a foot in the door. So I jumped on that and then 3 months became 4 years with Canada. And I suppose that just from then on, I was working in a high performance environment because it was everything from men's 15s to two women's 15s World Cups, to preparation for the 2016 Olympics, which was the first time that sevens had been played, where the women actually got a bronze medal, the Canadian women. So it was very diverse and allowed me to really get a feel for what it was like working in professional sports and at that point, Olympic athletes. So, being able to train at the Canadian Institute of Sport. And then from then on, I think the trajectory was, I've been very fortunate as well in terms of network and relationships. And I've always, I suppose, challenged myself to knock on a door that I wasn't sure would open, or make a cold call or message or introduce myself to someone that I didn't know, just because I've always been very hungry to learn. I think that has also served because I've not been afraid to talk to people, and that's essentially how I ended up going from 3 months to 4 years with the Canadian team, because I would bounce between the programs. And off the back of that, after the Women's World Cup in 2017, we moved to Luxembourg with my wife. And yeah, from then on as well, even my, I suppose, transfer into French rugby came off the back of trying to find some professional rugby in the region. It was Heidelberg Rugby Club, which is about 2.5 hours away. Doing some Google research, finding out who the director of rugby was, a fellow called Cobus Proctor, who's now a good friend, who then himself ended up going to Stade Francais in Paris. He was the head coach of Germany at the time, but then he went to Paris, and he's also the one who got me opportunity to coach the under-18s there. Again, at the time, voluntary basis, because I paid my train tickets to go back and forth to Paris at the beginning, thinking that it was a great opportunity to be able to coach, and especially under 18s it's an awesome age to coach because you can focus on so many different things. And then from there, I was working with a guy who also worked at the French Union, who then told me that they were looking for someone within the under 20s. Yeah, so it just sort of snowballed on from there. So the under 20s rolled on to the senior men's, which ultimately opened the door for Monaco, which also ultimately opened the door to the professional side in Paris. And
it seems to me there's a lot of taking opportunities and being willing to put yourself out there. And it also sounds like actually thinking about the future. So you've taken a lot of unpaid jobs or probably low-paying jobs at the time, probably working excessive hours. Is that the kind of advice that you give to people? Or
you have to be willing to do the hard graft, because you have to be willing to do the unpaid things, because that's how you get noticed. If they see that you are invested in it and you're willing to do it, then someone's going to take notice of that and they'll go, okay, actually, no, he's keen or she's keen, and think that's a massive help. And you start building, people believe that they trust you then, and they see that you're invested in it. So you have to be willing to take risks. And for me, it was relocating to different countries for it. And ultimately, it was worth it. And I probably wouldn't change anything. There were times when you probably wonder, is this going to work? Why am I doing this? And I think, ultimately, if you don't ask, you don't get. So you need to be willing to put yourself out there. And I think for me, everybody wants the top end job straight away. There's so much demand because everybody wants to do it. So what's going to separate you from the next person? Is it education? Is it the fact that you've got, 3 masters, a PhD, or is it because you've worked 20 years in one club, or is it just because you're good at what you do, you're passionate about what you do, and you can bring a certain skill set to the organisation, which was probably the latter for me. So, I was just very passionate about it. And like I said, I didn't have studies until I did my master's 10 years later in sports coaching. And then, that was, okay, maybe I should get a bit more in depth about what I'm doing now as a career, which is why I chose to do it later. But I didn't have a ton of experience as well, and I didn't have the network I do now. So it was very much, if you told me 10 years ago that, I would have done the following, I wouldn't have believed you, because it seemed very out of reach. Again, you've got to take all the opportunities that are there, even if you think they're not there, and it may amount to nothing, but it may amount to something. So
yeah, I hear you saying that with some get you into talking to our Lunex students about taking your opportunities, going out, putting yourself out there, actually having to go and do some things. You can't stay in your kind of comfort zone, and everything's just going to fall into place. You need to do something, really. Yeah.
And I remember sitting in Paris one day. We were sitting in a club with Paul Gustave, the defence coach. We were sitting there having a coffee. It was in between sessions. The players were in the gym. We were just having a bit of a coffee break. And he says to me, "How good do we have it?" And he says, "We're sat here Thursday morning, 10 o'clock, in trackies, shorts, drinking coffee in a massive stadium in the centre of Paris." And so that's when you realise that actually, if you're willing to put in the work, then coaching is a lifestyle, it's not a job. So, by that I mean that you can't be thinking about the remuneration from it, because it's not a 9 to 5. It doesn't provide the security that some jobs do, because you could be out of a job just as quickly. But it's a lifestyle, and you have to be willing to live it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You actually don't know what's going to happen, but it is a wonderful place. And coaching is a weird kind of setup, because lots of people don't see what you do on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. They'll see your performance on the field, so we'll be watching to see what your results are. Yeah, and not all the stuff that goes on in the background about how do you build the relationships with your athletes, how do you care about them as individuals, whole range of other kind of things that go on, and not just the final result. It's a strange workplace, but it's a really exciting one to be in.
A very rewarding one as well.
Mm-hmm. Just coming towards the end, I think just as a final, I suppose, kind of summary of what you're doing is, how do we develop this high-performance sport kind of thought process here in Luxembourg? How do we you talked about, we've got facilities, we've got resources to be able to do it. How do we make the final push to get us into a highest level?
In one word, collaboration.
Collaboration.
Yeah. Because of the size of the country, smaller size of the country, I think you need to have collaboration between federations, between coaches of different sports, sharing ideas. There needs to be a growth mindset approach in terms of what one S&C coach in football might do versus what one S&C coach might do in rugby, what this is the basketball S&C coach, or in terms of practice, or in terms of even what we spoke about, the advertising side of the game, the promotional side, and media, the resources that are available, the facilities, establishments and organisations like Lunex. If there's a collaboration throughout the country in terms of sports, whether it's from the educational side to the performance side to the grassroots, from various sports, individual, collective, whatever it might be, I think overall it will lend itself to performance.
It's a good answer. James, it's an absolute privilege to have you on here. I really enjoy our insights and our chatting through this kind of stuff. We probably could keep on going for a few more hours and discussing various different kind of topics. You've got a couple of big games coming up, so I'm going to wish you all the best for that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much again for coming on.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.